The gift of hope is sometimes the most important gift of all. There were many, thousands and thousands of contraptions like this created. And they were all created because of a conversation U.S. Air Force pilot Gail Halvorson had with children in West Berlin in July of 1948. One of the children, a group of 30, a girl of 12 with wistful blue eyes wearing oversized trousers, said, "We could exist with very little if we knew that the Western Allies would stay with us and do their best." Clearly there was a disaster going on, but it wasn't a natural disaster. No, it was a human-made disaster. In June of 1948, the month earlier, the Soviets decided they wanted control of all of Berlin. At the end of World War II, they had been given control of a part of it, but they wanted all of it. And they decided to use a siege, a blockade, to force West Berlin to join them. And so they blocked the road access, the railway access, and the river access to West Berlin, which is in the middle of what was then East Germany. So it was a little island in the middle of East Germany that had no way to have goods shipped in. The only way that was left was by the air. Again, at the end of World War II, the negotiation was that there would be 3 flight paths open to the Allies to access West Berlin. Well, air access, West Berlin had 2.2 million people in it in 1948. It was estimated they were going to need 4,500 tons, 4,500 tons per day to survive of food and supplies. And this was at a time when cargo planes each carried less than 10 tons. So I've done the math. We're talking suddenly at least 500 flights were going to be needed a day to keep the West Berliners alive and with heat in their homes, because most of the heat then was generated by coal. Well, the Allies said they would take on the task. And it had started up when this conversation took place in July of 1948. Gail Halvorson had landed his plane, and it takes time to unload almost 10 tons of material off of a plane. So he had some time to kill, and he noticed some children over by the mesh fence. And so he went over to talk to them. He had been in World War II and talked to children wherever he had been stationed. And one of them said, "How many bags of flour can you fit in your plane?" And they discussed that. And how many loaves of bread can be made from each bag of flour? And then another child said, "You know, my relatives from East Berlin come to West Berlin every day to go to the library to read the newspapers published in West Berlin, because they're very different than the newspapers published in East Berlin. They find out a lot more from the newspapers published in West Berlin." And then that girl with the wistful blue eyes, with the oversized trousers, said, "We could exist with very little." So he spoke to them for about an hour, but then he had to get back because he was doing 3 flights a day from West Germany into West Berlin. And after he said goodbye, he was walking away, but he thought, there's something really different about this conversation. Well, yes, I know the topic was different, that most children, these were adult topics these children were all talking about, but most of them had lived through World War II, so they really hadn't been children for a long time. But there's something else. They didn't ask me for candy. Every place I've been before, they've always asked me for candy. I hadn't planned to see them. Oh. So he searched in his pockets and came up with 2 sticks of gum. So he turned around and went back and said, I want to share some candy with you, but I only have 2 sticks of gum. And he passed it through the fence. And they carefully broke it up into, well, less than 30 pieces. Excuse me, gum can only be broken up so far. But the children who didn't get any of the gum wanted pieces of the wrappers, and they enjoyed them and carefully tucked them away for future enjoyment. And he watched all this. Gail Halverson, the pilot, watched all this and said, tomorrow I'm going to drop some candy out of my plane for you when I'm landing in one of my flights. And there was a buzz of conversation in German, and that girl with the wistful blue eyes and oversized trousers said, "What plane will you be flying?" "Oh, I don't know. I fly a different plane every day." Buzz of conversation. "Well, it will be difficult for us to spot a little package. We need to know what plane." So he thought and said, "Oh, I'll wiggle my wings at you." And there was another buzz of conversation. "What is wiggle?" And he went, "Ah." And they went, "Wiggle, yeah, jawohl, wiggle." And so with that, he turned and went back. He told his other 2 crew members what had happened, and when they got back to their base, they pooled together all their rations, went to the PX, and bought enough Hershey bars to really damage a kid coming down. And so they decided they had to break it up into 3 piles, and they made these mini parachutes to hopefully break the fall. So their first flight in the next day, there were no children gathered, so the packages didn't go out. The next flight, though, there was a group there. So one of the crew members pushed them out as they were landing. The crew couldn't see what had happened because, you know, they were landing. But as they were leaving several hours later, they saw the children wiggling the parachutes at all the planes that were leaving. Well, Gail Halverson and his crew kept up this, became known as candy bombing, which sounds a little damaging, but first unofficially, and then when they were discovered officially. And then they got support from this country, candy manufacturers, children, like the children in Chicopee, Massachusetts made 40,000 parachutes like this. And then they were tying just 1 Hershey bar to it, not a whole ton of them. The blockade continued for 15 months. The Allies worked up to an average of 600 flights a day. The Soviets eventually gave up. The Allies looked like they could do this forever. The Allies had brought in 2.3 million tons. So I can't really get my head around that. Million tons is so. Gail got a number of thank you letters. One started out, "Lieber Schokoladenflieger," "Dear Chocolate Flyer," which I thought was a better expression than candy bomber. And it said, "Thank you so much for your sweet treats. The youngest of us had never had any chocolate. For them, it was just a dream. Chocolate is available in our shops, but don't ask the cost. Our parents can't scrape together enough money to spend on something like chocolate. As much as we were afraid of the American planes during the war, are we thankful to see them today as they are bringing the food we need to eat." There was a 50th anniversary of the candy bomber with some of the children who had received these gifts. One of them told Gail Halverson, "This came out of a cloud, it surprised me, but it wasn't the chocolate. This proved that someone outside our blockaded city knew of my problems. It wasn't the chocolate. It was hope." Sometimes the most important gift is the gift of hope.